By the time the sheriff finished taping the eviction notice to the HOA clubhouse door, the board meeting had fully transformed into chaos in pastel tracksuits. Linda Fairview, the HOA president, shrieked at the top of her lungs as she slammed her binder of bylaws on the folding table so hard the complimentary cookies bounced. "This is illegal," she yelled. The sheriff didn't even flinch. "Ma'am, you and the board are hereby notified that all common areas, access roads, and amenities of Meadow Park Estates Homeowners Association sit on land owned by one," he checked the paper, "Mr. Nolan Pike." Every head turned toward the back of the room where I was leaning against the wall, quietly sipping the world's most awkward coffee from a foam cup. "You," Linda hissed, pointing at me like she'd just identified the source of all her problems. "You're the squatter with the illegal barn. You don't even belong to this community." "Funny you say that," I replied calmly. "Because technically the entire community belongs to me." The room exploded in shrieks, questions, and someone crying about their mortgage. Linda jabbed her finger toward the sheriff with fury in her eyes. "You can't evict an entire HOA, she shouted. "We have bylaws." The sheriff adjusted his hat with a tired expression. "Ma'am, bylaws don't trump the county land records." She rounded on me next, her eyes blazing with rage. "If you think you can stroll in here, wave some paperwork around, and take everything we've worked for," she started to threaten. I shrugged with a slight smile. "Lady, you started all this with a $50 fine over my mailbox. And that was how an HOA discovered its entire kingdom was built on land it didn't actually own. My name is Nolan Pike. 42 years old. Civil engineer by training, land surveyor by trade, personality somewhere between quiet neighbor and the guy who only comes out to get mail at 11 at night. I'd spent 15 years working on other people's projects. Roads, drainage plans, subdivision plats. I liked maps, topography, and being left alone. People, not so much. After a small tech stock gamble paid off, I did what any introverted man with a mild obsession for land records would do. I started buying property. Timber tracts. Hunting parcels. Old family land no one wanted. Then one day at the county courthouse auction, lot number 47 hit the list. Approximately 1,500 contiguous acres, tax foreclosure, former Meadow Ridge Holdings, LLC. The minimum bid was suspiciously low. The legal description was a mess. Half-finished plats, half-recorded easements. Exactly the kind of nightmare no one wants to touch. Exactly the kind of nightmare I knew how to read. I spent 40 minutes tracing parcel boundaries while the auctioneer worked through storage units and abandoned sheds. When Lot 47 finally came up, only one other guy raised his paddle, and I could tell he thought he was bidding on hunting land. He dropped out fast. 10 minutes later, I owned 1,503 acres of scrubby hills, creek bottom, and according to some very old, very weird documents, a bunch of future residential holdings that had never been correctly parceled. I drove out that weekend, expecting trees and nothing else. What I found instead was a gated subdivision called Meadow Park Estates. A large stone entrance sign I definitely did not approve. Roughly 220 beige houses. An HOA clubhouse sitting on what the records called Parcel A. And my favorite part. The county GIS showed every one of those homes sitting on unreleased leaseholds and lapsed options from a defunct developer that never actually finished buying the underlying land. In other words, the HOA owned the decor. The residents owned the lumber and drywall. But the dirt they were all resting on? That belonged to me. Here's the thing. I wasn't trying to be a villain. My original plan was simple. Build a small cabin on the far side of the property, away from the subdivision. Put up some fencing. Maybe run a few cows. Let the HOA people live their beige, committee-approved lives in peace. Problem was, the HOA people didn't return the favor. The first time I met Linda Fairview, she was marching down my gravel drive in a visor and pastel tracksuit, flanked by 2 board members with clipboards like they were her emotional support assistants. "Sir," she called before she'd even reached my gate. "This road is not up to Meadow Park Estates standards." I looked at the road she was pointing at. The logging trail I'd graveled myself, clearly outside their decorative stone entrance and clearly marked with a county road number. "That's because it's not yours," I said. "You're trespassing." She gave me a tight smile. Everything past the gate is subject to HOA guidelines, mister. She paused expectantly. Pike, I said. She whipped out a printed packet. Your RV, tractor, and metal barn are all violations. Outbuildings must be pre-approved and visually consistent with the community. I stared at her. I don't live in your community. If you use our roads and enter through our gates, you are part of the community, she replied, like she'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. That gate is on my land, I said slowly. You realize that, right? She laughed in the brittle way people do when they don't understand and also don't care. Sir, we've been here for years. We have an HOA. We have covenants. You can't just show up with some rusty equipment and think you're exempt. By the end of the week, I received my first friendly notice of non-compliance in the mail. It accused me of storing commercial equipment in view of the road. That was my tractor. Housing livestock without board permission, my 3 cows. Using unapproved mailbox design, a plain black box on a treated post. Fine total, $150, accruing daily until remedied. I ignored it. They escalated. I caught Linda's assistants taking photos over my fence. A drone hovered over my barn one afternoon until I pointed a high-powered flashlight straight at its camera and watched it wobble away like a guilty bug. Then came the letter from the HOA's legal counsel claiming I had no valid easement to use the main subdivision road and gate and must cease entry or face legal action. They were threatening to block my only paved access road on land I didn't just use. Land I owned. It's amazing how fast ignore and live in peace turns into okay. Let's be methodical about this. I took everything to attorney Rachel Hahn, a property lawyer whose office was stacked with more plats and casebooks than decoration. She skimmed the foreclosure deed, the old developer agreements, and the HOA's threatening letter. Then she sat back and let out a low whistle. Oh, they're in trouble, she said with a grin. Short version. The original developer, Meadow Ridge Holdings, had gotten option contracts to buy sections of the 1,500 acres over time as they built out phases. They recorded plat maps for the first few streets but never finished transferring the underlying fee-simple land. Then the developer went bankrupt. Their lender foreclosed on everything they actually owned. The stuff they didn't properly buy. That reverted back through tax foreclosure and ended up in the lot I purchased. The HOA had recorded CC and RS for house lots that, on paper, sort of existed on top of land the HOA itself had no clear title to. Common areas, I asked. Rachel smiled like a wolf with a law degree. All on Parcel A. Parcel A is undeniably yours. Roads, gate, clubhouse, playground. And the individual homes, I asked. Structurally, they own the improvements. But their easements across your land and their right to occupy it? Legally shaky. That's a judge's nightmare to sort out. So what do we do? I asked. Well, she said, tapping her pen, we start by letting them hang themselves. We sent the HOA a polite certified letter. Dear Meadow Park Estates Board, it has come to our attention that your association facilities and membership access rely on property and easements belonging to our client, Mr. Nolan Pike. We request a meeting to discuss formalizing easements and usage agreements in good faith. Linda emailed back within hours. We will not be blackmailed by some squatter with a barn. You are subject to our covenants. You will remove all unapproved structures and animals or face lien and foreclosure. She copied half the neighborhood and their attorney. 2 weeks later, they sued me. Count 1, trespass. Count 2, nuisance. Count 3, unauthorized use of HOA roads and gate. Rachel read the complaint and actually laughed. They're going to regret paying the filing fee, she said. She responded with a counterclaim that was robust. Quiet title to confirm my ownership of Parcel A and surrounding acreage. Ejectment of HOA improvements encroaching on my land without proper easements. Declaratory judgment that the HOA's CC and RS did not and could not apply to me. Damages for harassment, slander of title, and interference with access. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing. Linda showed up in pearls and rage. At the hearing, Rachel put up one huge map on the projector. Parcel lines, recorded plats, and the foreclosure deed. Your Honor, she said, this is not a squatter situation. This is a situation where an HOA built its kingdom on paperwork someone else never finished filing. And my client bought what was left legally, properly, and before any of these people realized they were, in essence, guests on his land. The judge looked over his glasses at the HOA attorney. "Counsel, do you dispute Mr. Pike's deed to Parcel A?" The man shuffled papers nervously. "The HOA has used and maintained those areas for years, Your Honor. There's an argument of," he started to explain. "Do you dispute his deed?" the judge repeated with clear impatience. "No, Your Honor," the attorney admitted quietly. "And these trespass allegations are because he placed a barn and drove a tractor on his own land?" the judge asked. "Yes, but per HOA bylaws," the attorney tried to explain. "HOA bylaws do not override the property records of this county," the judge said flatly. "We're going to trial. And in the meantime, the HOA is ordered to cease issuing fines or interfering with Mr. Pike's access." Linda stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, if we don't enforce standards, this neighborhood will fall apart," she declared. The judge gave her a look I recognized. The look of a man who has seen too many HOAs. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "your whole neighborhood may already be falling apart in ways you don't yet understand." That was when I knew the ground had shifted, and this time, under them. Word spread faster than wildfire. Residents learned in fragments that their HOA had sued the barn guy and somehow lost round one. The judge had questioned whether the HOA even had clear rights to their own roads. The guy they were trying to find might actually own everything. The board tried to smother the panic with cheery newsletters. "Don't listen to rumors," they wrote in all capital letters. "Your HOA is strong. Property values are excellent." Meanwhile, Rachel was in full attack mode. She subpoenaed the original developer contracts, the HOA's insurance policies, all board minutes where anyone had mentioned me, my land, or that barn. Those minutes turned out to be gold. In one meeting, Linda had said, on the record, "I don't care what the county says about who owns what. If he's using our entrance and our roads, he is under my jurisdiction." The "my" slipped out. The stenographer caught it. We also got our hands on multiple real estate disclosures where Linda, acting as an unofficial advisor, had told buyers all land issues are fully resolved. This is a well-established HOA community, no title concerns. Spoiler: there were title concerns. When the HOA's insurance company saw the counterclaim seeking millions in potential damages and land value, they straight-up denied coverage on anything related to pre-existing title defects, which meant any settlement or judgment was coming out of the HOA reserve fund, special assessments on homeowners, and, crucially, the personal assets of board members who had knowingly misrepresented things. The judge ordered mediation first, probably to avoid making national news by letting someone actually evict an HOA. At mediation, I laid out my position. I owned the 1,500 acres, free and clear. I was not trying to evict 200 families. I was absolutely done being fined on my own land by people who could barely read a plat map. If we didn't work something out, a court was going to have to choose between recognizing property law or saving HOA feelings. Linda leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "This is extortion. He wants to hold us hostage," she said accusingly. I leaned back. "Lady, you tried to lien my land for having a red barn," I said calmly. Rachel slid a sheet across the table to the mediator. An appraisal of the 200 or so acres under the subdivision and common areas. The number at the bottom, what that land was worth if I sold it for industrial or commercial development instead of letting an angry HOA sit on it, made the HOA treasurer visibly pale. The mediator spoke gently. "If this goes to judgment and Mr. Pike prevails, your association could be liable for the value of the encroachment or for loss of use if he restricts access. So he can evict us," a board member squeaked. "In theory," the mediator said carefully, "he can block or charge for use of his land. He could also sell portions. Banks do not like uncertainty like that under their mortgages." That's when they realized their HOA drama wasn't just about mailbox colors anymore. It was about whether banks would even keep their loans if the dirt under their homes turned into a legal question mark. Trial day felt less like a lawsuit and more like an execution the HOA had accidentally scheduled for itself. Rachel called the county recorder to testify. She walked him through the defective deeds, the incomplete transfers, the foreclosure sale I'd bought at. Then she put one of the original developer's former partners on the stand. Did your company ever pay for the underlying fee simple title to Parcel A or the sections platted as common area? She asked directly. No, he admitted. We planned to, but the financing fell through. The HOA went ahead anyway. Linda's face hardened. She'd been saying for months this was all a clerical error. Having a witness admit we never actually bought it in open court was inconvenient. The HOA's attorney tried to argue that years of use gave them permanent rights. Rachel politely dismantled that by pointing out they'd acknowledged, in internal emails, that technically the dirt still belongs to some holding company or bank. The holding company was the one whose land I'd purchased at auction. Their so-called permanent use was basically we've been trespassing for a long time, Rachel explained. Finally, the judge delivered his ruling. My title to the 1,500 acres, including all common areas and access roads, was confirmed. The HOA's CC and RS were declared not binding on me or my remaining undeveloped acreage. The HOA's attempt to fine, lien, and sue me over my use of my own land was ruled wrongful and abusive, making them liable for damages. The continued encroachment of HOA amenities on my land required a compensation agreement or modification of use, to be negotiated under court supervision. Then came the consequences. Rachel had prepped a reasonable settlement framework. Reasonable for me, anyway. Residents would have 3 options. Buy the land under their individual home footprints at a fair discounted per acre rate within 18 months. If they didn't want to buy, they could accept a 99-year ground lease with a modest annual fee, guaranteed access and peace. The HOA, however, would have to surrender all control of common areas and dissolve as part of the agreement, because the board had shown itself reckless and unfit in managing property interests. The judge looked it over. It's harsh, he said, but it's rational, and it avoids mass eviction. The alternative is litigating damages parcel by parcel. I'm not doing that for the next decade. He approved it, with one extra twist. Because the board had knowingly misrepresented the status of land and repeatedly harassed me, certain portions of the damage award would be collectible from board members personally. That was the moment Linda realized this wasn't just about losing to the barn guy. She was going to pay for it. Literally. Within 6 months, the HOA reserve fund was gutted to pay my legal fees and damages. A special assessment hit every homeowner like a meteor. Enough of them demanded change that an emergency vote removed the entire board. As for Linda, she'd leveraged her house to pay for her own attorney and the personal judgment against her. When the dust settled, she could no longer afford the ground beneath her house. Her home went into foreclosure. The personal damages awarded against Linda totaled $275,000. The look on her face when the judge read that number was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and pure devastation. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. "But you can't," she started to protest, her voice breaking. The judge simply looked at her with tired eyes and said, "Ma'am, you chose to pursue this action despite multiple warnings about the validity of your claims. You bear responsibility for the consequences."